Welcome to Starbound. My name is I Am Duck, and I'll be your narrator today. Nearly 500 supporters get early access to our stories, including brand new episodes of Sunspy Academy and Freyrin and Rimaki. If you'd like to unlock early access and support new episodes and future series, tap join below to become a Starbound member. Now, let's get into today's story. The group of 3 Deathworlder mercenaries was sitting around a bonfire, and Trozax couldn't stand the topic the other 2 were discussing. They were from different species, a Stronia and a Vozax, and they both believed themselves to be the apex predators of the galaxy. Were they truly that arrogant? Or would Trozax really need to explain to them why the galaxy calls humans the final evolution of predators? The crackling flames cast moving shadows across the clearing where they'd made camp, the local wildlife keeping a respectful distance from the trio of off-world killers. Zehix, the Stronia, threw back his head and laughed, the sound wet and gurgling as it bubbled through the toxin glands in his throat.
You actually believe that bulk of yours makes you superior?
Zehix said, pointing a dripping finger at Lero. Zehix's form was bipedal, not unlike a human in basic structure, but his skin was a mottled pattern of deep green with black spots that seemed to shift in the firelight. Every inch of his body glistened with the poisonous secretions that made his species infamous across the galaxy.
My kind sits at the very top of the food chain, Vozax. Why do you think the Council selected me for this team? I could poison every single predator of this backwater planet if I wanted. And they selected the best.
Lero, the Vozax, paused in tearing into a massive chunk of roasted meat, each bite revealing rows of teeth designed for crushing bone. He set down his meal with a certain slowness and stomped the ground once, the impact sending tremors through the fluffy soil that Trozax felt in his bones. Only then did the massive creature speak, his voice a rumble like distant thunder.
A species that relies on toxins for their fights could never claim to be the ultimate Deathworlders,
Lero said simply, then returned to his meal without another word, as if the matter was settled. Trozax felt his anger building as he watched the interaction, a heat that had nothing to do with the bonfire. The display of power from Lero triggered a memory so absurd it made his heart race with indignation. He remembered being in a spaceport bar when a human, a small female barely reaching Trozax's shoulder, had spotted a Vozax like Lero at another table. The woman's eyes had lit up with pure delight. "Oh my god, it's like a Yeti alien!" she squealed. Actually, squealed, before approaching the 7-foot-tall wall of muscle and white fur. "Can I pet you? Oh, your fur looks so fluffy!" The Vozax, a hardened mercenary with scars crisscrossing his arms, had frozen in complete bewilderment as the human reached up and ran her fingers through his fur, cooing about how soft it was. The entire bar had watched in stunned silence as one of the galaxy's most feared warrior species was reduced to a petting zoo animal by a creature third his size. The memory kept playing in Trozax's head as the duo went on bickering.
The Stronia have conquered empires through biological warfare alone,
Zehix continued, oblivious to what was going on inside Trozax's mind.
No species can match our natural weapons. We are evolution's perfect killing machines.
That did it. Trozax exploded to his feet, his tail whipping in front of him with enough force to scatter embers from the fire. "You're both wrong," he snarled, fixing each of his fellow Deathworlder mercenaries with a glare from his purple eyes. Neither of you represents the final evolution of predators. If you weren't so blinded by your own ignorance, I could educate you on which species truly deserves that title. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Zihix and Lero exchanged glances before bursting into laughter.
Let me guess,
Zihix said, toxin dripping more freely as his mirth increased.
You think the Immi are the apex predators, with your little bone-tipped tail and fancy tongue.
Lero joined in, setting aside his meal entirely.
Look at him! Purple eyes like a hatchling, that long tongue flicking out to taste the air.
The Vozax made air quotes with his massive claws.
What are you going to do, Trozax? Smell us to death?
Oh, look at the Trozax,
Zix added, wiping tears of toxin from his eyes.
He doesn't rely on brute strength like our furry friend here. No, the Immi's great evolutionary advantages. What exactly? Your scales? The tail that looks like it belongs on a parade float?
Trozax's hand moved before conscious thought, his pistol clearing its holster and leveling at the space between his two companions. The laughter died instantly. I wasn't talking about my own species, Trozax said, his voice deadly calm. I was talking about the humans. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the distant sounds of the planet's nocturnal hunters seemed to pause. Zihix's toxin production went into overdrive, pooling at his feet, a fear response. Lero's fur stood on end, making him look even larger, but Trozax could see the way his muscles tensed, ready to flee rather than fight.
Lower the gun, Trozax,
Zihix said, his voice tight.
There's no need for...
Put it down,
Lero interrupted, his usual rumbling bass pitched high with anxiety.
We were just joking around.
Trozax took a deep breath, tasting the fear pheromones in the air with his sensitive tongue. Slowly, he holstered his weapon and sat back down on the same rock as before, never breaking eye contact with either of them. Humans, he repeated, staring into the bonfire. The flames reminded him of Earth's sun, that yellow star that had birthed something the galaxy still didn't fully understand. I could tell you stories that would change your minds about who the real apex predators are. Stories from personal experience. The other two remained frozen for several heartbeats before gradually relaxing. Zihix was the first to speak, his voice carefully neutral.
You've worked with humans?
Multiple times, Trozax confirmed. Would you like to hear about it? Lero settled back onto his haunches, his meal forgotten.
Yes, tell us.
Please,
Zihix added, settling back into his spot but maintaining a respectful distance from Trozax. Trozax let the silence stretch, organizing his thoughts. Where to begin? How to explain to these two what he'd witnessed, what he'd learned about the species that looked so harmless, but had fundamentally changed his understanding of what it meant to be a predator. My first story, he began, is about a human I met on my very first mercenary job for the Galactic Council. His name was Tony. Just Tony. Humans often use these shortened names, though I never learnt if it was derived from something longer. He paused, letting his tongue flick out to taste the air again, confirming his audience was genuinely listening. Have either of you heard of Illamar? Both shook their heads in denial. Consider yourselves fortunate, Trozax continued. Illamar is the worst jungle death world I've ever set foot on. Imagine, if you will, a planet where the atmosphere itself seems to hunger for your death. The humidity so thick you feel like you're drowning with every breath. The gravity is 1.4 standard. Just enough to make every step a struggle, but not enough to kill you outright. The planet prefers to take its time. He leaned forward, the firelight hitting his scales from closer. The trees grow to heights of 300 meters, their canopy so dense that the forest floor exists in perpetual twilight. But it's not the darkness you need to fear. It's what lives in it. The vines move on their own, seeking warm blood to drain. The flowers release spores that burrow into your lungs and grow, slowly suffocating you from the inside. Even the smallest insects carry enough venom to drop both your species in minutes. Lero shifted uncomfortably at that. And the rain, Trozax continued, his voice dropping. When it rains on Illamar, the water is acidic enough to burn through standard armor in hours. We had to wear special suits just to survive the weather, let alone the wildlife.
Why would the council send you and a human in there?
Zix asked, genuinely curious now. Because something lived in that green hell that they wanted for their zoo, Trozax replied. A Konav. Ever heard of one? Both mercenaries shook their heads again. Picture, if you can, a creature that combines the worst aspects of every predator you've encountered. 6 legs ending in claws so sharp that they shine. A hide thick enough to shrug off plasma fire. Jaws that unhinge to swallow prey whole. Prey up to the size of a small ground vehicle. And intelligent too, not sapient, but clever enough to set traps, to study patterns, to learn from every encounter.
And they sent you to capture one alive?
Lero's voice held a note of disbelief. Me and Tony, Trozax confirmed. 1 IMI tracker and 1 human. I thought it was a death sentence. I spent the entire shuttle ride down planning my funeral rites, convinced the council had given us an impossible task just to see how long we'd last. He paused, remembering. Tony spent the ride reading something on his datapad and laughing. Laughing? As we descended into that green hell, he was watching a podcast. When I asked if he understood what we were heading into, he just smiled and said, "Sounds like fun."
Fun?
Zihix repeated flatly. That's what I thought. I assumed I'd been paired with a madman. But when we landed and began our trek into the jungle, I started to understand. Where I saw death in every shadow, Tony saw wonder. He'd stopped to examine plants that I knew were lethal, taking samples and making notes. When a pack of razor wings swooped overhead, flying predators that hunt in coordinated swarms, he pulled out a capture device and started recording their calls. Trozax shook his head at the memory. I was exhausted within hours. The gravity, the heat, the constant vigilance, it was grinding me down. But Tony, he moved through that jungle like he was taking a stroll through a park. He never tired, never showed fear. He was happy, genuinely happy to be exploring one of the deadliest environments in known space.
How long did it take to track the Konav?
Lero asked, drawn into the story despite himself. 6 days, Trozax replied. 6 days of following traces through terrain that wanted us dead. Tony taught me things during that trek, how to read subtle signs I'd missed, how to move more efficiently in the heavy gravity, how to actually work with the environment instead of just enduring it. By the time we found the creature's lair, I was almost keeping pace with him. Almost. He paused, letting the crackling fire fill the silence. The cave entrance was massive, carved into the base of a cliff by centuries of occupation. Bones littered the approach, some from creatures I recognized, many I didn't. The smell, even now, I can remember it. Death and predator musk so thick I could almost see it. Tony wanted to go in immediately. I tried to convince him to wait, to set traps, to find another way. I was terrified of facing that thing in its own environment, where it would have every advantage, but Tony just checked his equipment and said, "The best way to understand alien animals is to meet them on their own terms."
"Oh, he went in alone?"
Hicks asked, his tone suggesting he couldn't decide if this was brave or stupid. "For the first 3 days, yes," Trozax confirmed. "I stayed outside guarding the entrance, setting up our base camp. I could hear things from inside, movements, occasionally what might have been vocalizations, but no screams, no sounds of battle, just Tony's voice." He drew a deep breath. On the 4th day, my shame finally outweighed my fear. I couldn't stand being the coward who let his partner face death alone anymore, so I entered the cave. The fire popped, sending sparks into the night sky. Neither of his companions moved. The tunnel went deep, deeper than I'd expected. The walls were smooth, worn by the passage of something large over many years. I followed the main passage, my weapon ready, every nerve screaming at me to turn back, and then I heard it, a sound I couldn't immediately identify. It was rhythmic, almost like... He paused, meeting their eyes. Like laughter. Quiet laughter. I rounded the final corner, preparing for anything, or so I thought.
"What did you find?"
Lero prompted when Trozax fell silent. The cave opened into a vast chamber, lit by some form of bioluminescent fungi. The floor was covered in a thick layer of shred fur that made surprisingly comfortable bedding. And in the center of it all, Trozax stood again, but this time not in anger. He needed to move, to gesture, to somehow convey the impossibility of what he'd witnessed. The Konav was on its back. This massive predator, this perfect killing machine that the Council wanted for their zoo, was on its back with its legs in the air. And Tony, this small, soft, seemingly fragile human, was rubbing its belly. The creature's rear leg was kicking the air in pleasure, like some strange pet.
"You're lying,"
Zix said flatly. "I have video evidence," Trozax replied. The Konav was easily 8 times Tony's mass. Its claws could have eviscerated him with a casual swipe. One bite would have cut him in half. And they was cooing at it in that strange human baby talk they use with animals, telling it what a good boy it was while scratching behind what I suppose were its ears. He sat back down heavily. When Tony noticed me, he waved me over casually like we were in a park on a civilized world. "Come meet Rex," he said. Rex! He'd named it. 3 days, and he'd turned one of the deadliest predators in the galaxy into something that rolled over for belly rubs. "How?" Lero's question was brief, but it conveyed his shock. "That's one thing that makes humans the final evolution of predators," Trozax explained, staring into the fire. "They don't just hunt. They don't just kill. They form pack bonds with anything that has even a basic level of intelligence. Where we see threats to be eliminated or avoided, they see potential friends. It's not just that they can do it, it's that it comes naturally to them. Tony wasn't using some advanced technique or technology. He was just being human."
"But that's just one example,"
Zix protested, though his voice lacked conviction.
"And it's just an animal. Any species can tame lesser creatures with enough effort."
"Can they?" Trozax challenged. "When was the last time you heard of a Stronia befriending their prey? When has a Vozax ever turned a predator into a pet? Most of us define ourselves by our ability to kill. Humans look at the universe's deadliest creatures and think, I bet that would like ear scratches. Huh.
So do the Stronia,
Zix added quickly.
Our pharmaceutical knowledge makes us invaluable allies. Being able to pet dangerous animals is hardly a useful skill for species at the galactic stage.
Trozak settled back onto his rock, a knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Is that what you think? That it stops at animals? That this ability of theirs doesn't scale up to sapient creatures? He let that hang in the air for a moment, tasting their uncertainty. Would you like to hear my second story? Because I assure you, once you understand the full scope of what humans are capable of, you'll never again question why they are called the final evolution of predators. The fire crackled between them, casting long shadows as Trozax prepared to shatter their worldview once more. Trozax let the silence stretch between them, savoring the anticipation in the air. The fire had burnt lower, but neither of his companions moved to add more fuel. They were waiting. My second story, he began, takes place years after my mission with Tony. This time I partnered with another human mercenary, a male who went by Ryan. Though he made it clear he didn't like his full name and preferred to be called Rye.
Another diminutive,
Zihix observed.
Is this common amongst humans?
More common than you'd think, Trozax replied, but that's beside the point. This mission wasn't for the Council. A private contractor hired us for something far more delicate than capturing exotic animals. He paused, organizing his thoughts. The job was to steal something valuable from a Credarian clan. You both know the Credarians. Lero nodded slowly.
Those green, mammalian warriors. Honorable to a fault, but not exactly law-abiding galactic citizens. If I remember correctly, their clans control most of the illegal trading in the galaxy.
Exactly, Trozax confirmed. And that's what made this job complicated. We couldn't simply kill everyone and take what we wanted. The contractor was very specific. No violence, no trail leading back to them. We were supposed to present ourselves as business associates and fabricate an opportunity to steal the item, without anyone knowing it was gone until we were several systems away.
Sounds unnecessarily complex,
Zix commented.
Why not use poison? Make it look like a rival clan's work.
Trozax's tail twitched in amusement. Because, my toxic friend, the item in question was a data crystal containing the clan's trade route encryptions. If they knew it was stolen, they'd change everything immediately. The theft had to remain undetected for at least a month.
So how did you manage that?
Lero asked, genuinely curious despite himself. We started by infiltrating a gala, Trozax continued. The Credarian boss was hosting potential business partners at his compound. We intercepted another pair of guests, put them to sleep with a neural disruptor, and took their invitation. Simple enough. He leaned forward, the firelight catching his purple eyes. But what happened at that gala? That's when I truly began to understand what makes humans different. The venue was spectacular. A large dome overlooking the Credarian capital, with their 3 moons visible through the transparent ceiling. Ryan walked into that room of 100 suspicious aliens like he owned it. He was wearing something that somehow had Credarian vibes, just enough to show respect without looking like he was trying too hard. Within minutes of showing up, he had the whole room's attention, not with force or anything, just pure human charisma. He told stories that had Credarian warriors laughing until tears ran down their faces. Lies, of course. He made them up so fast it was unbelievable. He complimented their females in ways that were bold but not offensive, earning their giggling approval. He debated philosophy with their elders, showing just enough knowledge to be interesting, but not enough to be threatening. I watched him move through that crowd all night, adapting his personality to each group, boisterous with the young warriors, respectful with the matriarchs, cunningly intelligent with the merchants. He even participated in a traditional card game, and he lost gracefully while making jokes about his handicap of being just a simple human. Trozak shook his head at the memory. By the end of the evening, the Credarian boss himself had invited Ryan to a private dinner at his home. Not me, just Ryan. The human had to argue to get me included.
That's not so impressive,
Zix interrupted.
Stronia are master manipulators. We've toppled governments through our network of spies.
And us Vozaks can command respect through sheer presence,
Lero added.
One look at us, and most species know to show proper deference.
Trozax laughed, a sharp sound that made both of them tense. He began playing with his pistol, not threatening but casual, spinning it around one claw as he stared at the bonfire. You think that's the impressive part? Oh, my friends, you haven't heard anything yet. He holstered the weapon and continued. Ryan earned the trust of the Credarian clan over several weeks. He became a regular at their compound, sharing meals, participating in their rituals, even sparring with their warriors, and losing when he had to lose, which earned him more respect than just winning could have. The memory was so vivid, Trozax could almost smell the incense from the Credarian ceremonies. I was excited as the day approached when we'd leave with our prize. The plan was perfect. Ryan had gained access to their secure areas, or mapped their security rotations, even befriended the guards who watched the vault. One more week and we'd be rich. He paused, letting the anticipation build. Then one night, Ryan came to our quarters and told me he wouldn't carry out the mission. He said mercenary life wasn't for him anymore. Zix and Lero burst out laughing.
He quit.
Zix wheezed, toxin dripping with his mirth.
After all that work.
Humans!
Lero roared.
So much for being apex predators. When it matters, they lose their nerve.
Trozax let them laugh, a knowing smile playing at his lips. When they finally quieted, he spoke again. You think he lost his nerve? No. Ryan gave up a fortune because he'd taken a fancy to the Credarian boss's daughter. The laughter died instantly.
What?
Lyra's voice was strangled.
But they are not even from the same species,
Zix said. Mira, Trozak said simply. Third daughter of Kridak the Blade Master. Beautiful by Credarian standards, which seemed to be enough to attract a human. Ryan was completely, helplessly, hopelessly in love.
But that's...
Zix struggled for words.
That's insane! Throwing away a fortune for a female of another species?
It gets better, Trozax continued, his voice rich with remembered amusement. Ryan didn't just abandon the mission. He confessed everything to Mira. Told her why he'd really come to their world, what he'd planned to steal, who had hired him, everything.
He signed his own death warrant?
Lero breathed. That's what I thought. I was already planning my escape when Ryan went to face Krydak himself. And do you know what that insane human did? He walked into the Blade Master's private chamber, looked him in the eye and said, I came here to rob you. I fell in love with your daughter instead. I have no money, no clan, no honor by your standards. We can't even have children together, but I want to marry her anyway. Trozak stood, beginning to pace as he remembered. The entire clan was in an uproar. Warriors demanded Ryan's head. Elders spoke of the shame it would bring. Mira's sisters called her a fool, and through it all, Ryan stood there, calm as still water, and began to speak. He turned to face his audience. For 3 hours that human talked. He began by admitting every detail of his deception, the false identity, the stolen invitation, how he'd memorized their customs to blend in. He named his employer, revealed the exact location of the data crystal he'd planned to steal, even explained the black market connections that would have moved it. The Cridarians were stunned by his thoroughness. Then he shifted to speaking to Mira. He quoted a poem she'd written when she was 12, something her own father had forgotten. He described the way she tilted her head when painting, how her lower left hand tapped rhythms when she was nervous. He spoke of conversations they'd had about interstellar philosophy, about her dreams of seeing Earth's oceans, about the lullaby she hummed while tending the clan's sacred gardens. He offered to undergo their warrior trials, suicide for most species. He promised to learn their language, their arts, their ways. He swore to make himself so useful to the clan that his presence would outweigh any shame his marriage might bring. But more than that, he spoke of building bridges between their species.
And they accepted this?
Zix's voice was barely above a whisper. Not immediately, Trozax admitted, but Ryan didn't give up. For months he courted both Mira and her entire family. He learned to forge in their traditional style. He helped negotiate trade deals that brought the clan substantial profits. He even saved Krydak's youngest son from a rival clan's assassination attempt. Took a blade meant for the boy. He sat back down, his voice dropping. 6 months after we were supposed to leave with stolen data, I attended Ryan's wedding to Mira. Krydak himself performed the ceremony. The human who'd come to rob them had become family. He'd turned enemies into allies, suspicion into trust, a mission of theft into a different kind of theft. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Zihix and Lero exchanged glances, and Trozax could taste their uncertainty in the air.
That's...
Lero started, then stopped.
My people take pride in diplomacy, but to confess crimes and still gain acceptance? In an alien world? I don't think a Vozax could do that.
Oh, no, Astronia,
Zix admitted quietly.
We manipulate, yes, but from shadows. To be that open, that vulnerable, and still win, it's not in our nature.
Trozax nodded slowly. Now you begin to understand. But there's more to this than just 2 stories. To truly grasp why humans are what they are, you need to understand their history. Lero shifted his massive bulk, a question clearly forming.
If humans are so diplomatically gifted, what does the Galactic Council think of them? How do they allow such a species to travel the stars freely?
Ah, Trozax said, his tail swishing with amusement. Now you're asking the right questions. The Council is divided. They've classified humans as the final evolution of predators. But even they don't know if that's a compliment or a warning.
What do you mean?
Zix asked, his toxin production slowing to a nervous trickle. Think about it, Trozax explained. A species that can befriend anything. That turns enemies into allies as naturally as breathing. Is that a force for good or evil? He paused, letting his tongue taste the night air. My personal experience with humans has been mostly positive. But the Council, they're still debating whether humanity is the galaxy's salvation or its most subtle conquest.
It's impressive, I'll grant you that,
Lero admitted grudgingly.
But final evolution of predators seems a bit over the top. They're just very good at making friends. And good fighters.
Trozax laughed, a sound that started low and built until he was almost doubled over. When he finally caught his breath, he wiped tears from his purple eyes. Oh, my friends, do I need to tell you yet another story? This one about a human woman, although, he paused dramatically. Perhaps I don't even need to tell the story. Maybe just saying her name would be enough. The two mercenaries exchanged uncertain glances, then nodded slowly. Katerina, Trozak said simply. The name caused their eyes to widen. Trozak felt a surge of pride. He was one of the few mercenaries in the galaxy who knew for certain that this name belonged to a human. He'd kept that secret for years, partly out of professional courtesy, partly out of self-preservation. The reaction was everything he'd hoped for. Lero's fur stood completely on end, making him look like a white mountain of terror. Zahix's toxin glands went into overdrive, creating a puddle of poison at his feet that began eating through the ground.
Katerina?
Lero's voice was low.
The Katerina? The name at the top of the Galactic Council's most wanted list.
10 billion credits, Zix breathed. The shadow of Andromeda. The ghost of the Terminus systems, that Katerina is human?
Impossible,
Lero said. His voice lacked conviction.
No one knows what species Katerina is. Everyone assumes it's just someone using a human name, trying to throw off investigators.
No assassin of that caliber would use their real name in their contracts,
Zix added desperately.
It has to be an alias. A misdirection.
Trozax leaned back, savoring their shock. I met her once, 3 years ago on some random station. I'd been hired to protect a shady executive. He touched a scar on his neck, barely visible beneath his scales. She had red hair. That's what I remember most clearly. Red like Earth's sunsets. Red like human blood. She came through the window of a space station, mind you. Killed my target with a single cut, then looked at me and smiled.
She smiled at you?
Lero's voice cracked. Like we were old friends meeting at a cafe, Trozax confirmed. Then she said, No hard feelings, it's just business, and jumped back out the window. She just jumped into space and lived. I still don't know how she pulled that off.
You're making this up,
Zix said weakly. I have the whole thing recorded on my helmet cam, Trozax replied. I'll show you later if you want. Though I should warn you, the council pays well for any information about Katerina, but everyone who's trying to collect has ended up very, very dead. He stood, stretching. So yes, my toxic friend, humans can fight. They can kill us with such precision that death itself seems like art. But that's not what makes them the final evolution. It's that they can choose. They can pet a deadly alien predator or put a plasma bolt through its brain. They can spend months becoming part of an alien family or ghost through security systems like they don't exist. They can love across species or kill across species. The fire had died to embers now, casting barely enough light to see. In that darkness, Trozax's purple eyes seemed to glow. Every other predator in the galaxy is limited by their nature. Stronia are always poisonous. Vozax are always strong. But humans can be anything. Diplomats or assassins, scientists or warriors, friends or nightmares, that is who they are. He looked at his two companions, taking in their hunched shoulders and wide eyes. The arrogance that had started the evening was gone, replaced by a healthy respect tinged with fear. The galaxy calls them the final evolution of predators because, after them, everyone's too scared to imagine what might evolve next, Trozax concluded. As if to emphasize his point, a shooting star streaked across the sky above them. Or perhaps it was a human ship carrying another master of friendship and death to some distant world. Trozax smiled to himself. He'd successfully removed every trace of arrogance from his companions. They now understood what he'd learned through years of experience. The galactic community wasn't wrong to call humans the final evolution of predators. They were, if anything, understating it.